mute, I think.
Oh,
As if she has hers on.
okay.
But I can hear you.
You can hear me?
Through the.
Yep.
All right.
3, 2, 1.
And good morning, everybody. Welcome to budget session for Thurston County. It's April 22nd, 2020, and it's Earth Day, by the way. And right now the Earth is not well. And we have until 11 o'clock to wrap this up, and we're just beginning. So going around the room, I will just introduce pretty much everybody. We've got County Manager Ramiro Chavez, County Commissioner Gary Edwards, and Commissioner Ty Menser. We have our Assistant County Commissioner and Budget Director or Finance Manager.
Assistant County Manager.
Assistant County Manager and Budget Director.
All of the above.
Not an Assistant Commissioner.
At all, Robin Campbell. And we got Darren, Denise, and Olivia also in attendance that are smarter than me. And so here we are. We're going to start with the budget.
Darren's here.
Do we? Well, I said Darren, but do we need our book?
We don't need our book today.
Okay,
good. I have a request.
Oh wait, I forgot to say who I am, or did I?
Yeah. There you are.
Okay, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner, and I'm sorry I'm late and I feel like there's an echo. I'm going to start by asking anyone who is calling in to mute their phones so we don't get the background noise on the phones. This morning, we're going to talk about the budget, and in a moment I'm going to share my screen so we can see the model that we can start to use to assess the impact of the pandemic on the county's finances. I had started working on a presentation, but the numbers didn't look right. So I apologize for starting later than we should have this morning, but I think we have a working model now to talk about the fact that what we have is a revenue issue. And we've talked a little bit about this before, but I think that the worksheet that we're going to look at is going to start to really make clear how it is a revenue concern and what those concerns might be. There's not a fancy graph, I'll tell you right now. I haven't had time to do the graph. I'll add the graph so that the next time you see this model, you'll be able to have the picture as well as the numbers. But for now, I'm going to ask you to follow along with the numbers. So I have to find a button that I can push that shares my screen. Come on. Here we go. And how do I get rid of these?
Commissioners?
I need to, how do I do, here we go.
Thank you, Denise.
This is the new spreadsheet. Like I said, there's not a cool graph yet, but I want you to pay attention to this line right here as we go through and make some assumptions about what's going to happen with the impact of the pandemic. What you see, this green column here, is our current budget. These are our actual revenues and expenditures back to 2014. You'll see the fund balance has gone up to a high of 15 million in 2017, came down to 11.8 million in 2018, back up to 13 million. And 2020, we are starting the fiscal year with a fund balance of about $20.5 million. That's pretty significant. That gives us a little bit of room this year. We have budgeted this year revenues of 43 million in property tax, 19.4 million in sales tax, and 42 million in all the other funding sources that come into the general fund. Those are other taxes, it's a share of the Olympia criminal justice sales tax, it's revenue sharing with the state, the liquor money, the marijuana money, it's all of the grants that we receive in the general fund, it's court fees, fines, all the other ways, interest that we earn on the fund, about 42 million in other revenues. And you have budgeted expenditures of a little over $103.2 million. If that all played out exactly the way it's in the budget, then we would have an ending fund balance this year of 21 million. In future years, I've made a few simple assumptions. I've assumed that property tax would grow at 1% per year, and I've assumed that expenditures would grow at 1% per year. Everything else I held flat, and we'll talk about what the assumptions might be as we work with this model. You also have a little bit of history here under the assumptions. So this line tells you that in each year, we only collect a fraction of the budgeted property tax. In 2014, for example, we collected 99.7% of the property tax that we budgeted. I've tried to get a little tighter with that, but it's always, we always collect less than we budget because of the way that we're required to budget our property tax. And we don't quite know how much will come in. So taking that first assumption and the impact on our revenue, if nothing else had changed, I was expecting this year that we would collect about 99.5% of our property taxes. So I'm just going to enter that now. And you'll see here that that means we will have about 215,000 less in revenue than if it had gone exactly the way we put it into the budget. Not a lot, nothing we can't handle, totally expected. We also know that growth in sales tax has been just rocking along the last 5 years. And as you see here on this line, we had 6.2% sales tax growth in 2015. It hit a high in 2018 of growth of 11.6%. It had started to soften as we've talked about, and in 2019 we collected 9.5% growth in our sales tax revenue, and you see the numbers up here. This year, we had based the budget on the 2019 budgeted amount of property tax. So what you see in the budget is very little growth based on the first few months of the year and looking at what the Washington State Economic and Revenue Forecast Council had projected. I thought that sales tax growth would be more like 6.8% above the budget. So, had we not had a pandemic, that's what sales tax growth would have looked like. I was estimating that we would have collected right around $20.7 million this year, which is about $1 million more than $1 million, more than we had put in the budget. That would have given us a little bit of money to work with, actually, as we looked at budget amendments. And in future years for sales tax and property tax, let's adjust those numbers down. 99.5% for property tax collections. And in sales tax, the Forecast Council has predicted 2.8% growth in 2021 and 3% in 2022. That would have given us a growing fund balance if we didn't spend any money on anything else than 1% inflation, and that's pretty low, I'm gonna say. So there would have been other adjustments, but the board would have had room for spending growth if all else remained equal. Well, this isn't what the picture is gonna look like, because with the pandemic, we know that instead of growth in sales tax, we're gonna have revenue reductions. The big question we've talked about is how much are those reductions gonna be? Nobody knows. And I know that I am already very tired of the response to how much being, I don't know. I'm tired of saying it. I'm tired of you having to hear it. You're probably tired of hearing it. And we're only a few weeks in. So I don't know is getting old pretty fast, just like the rest of the things connected to the pandemic. But we're going to be in this period of uncertainty for quite a while. And quite a while means many months. So for now, until we start to get some data, and that's going to mean that we're going to need to see the revenue coming in, and for sales tax, we are months out from that. Because of the delays, we're only gonna see a fraction of what we would have received come in at the end of April. We won't know if it's because of the degree of the downturn or the delay. We're not gonna know that. But we won't even see the first payment until April 30th. So instead of 6.8% growth in sales tax, if we take the amount that was lost in the Great Recession and we look at how much was lost over the course of 2 years, because that was a slow downturn, and instead we've got this hitting all at once. So I think we lost around 12%. So if we do a reduction of 12% in the first year, instead of growth in the fund balance, you see a reduction, and that's a loss of about $2.5 million. Then we also saw a loss in property tax revenue. We lost about 2% in the first year of the recession. So instead of 99.5% of collections, we'll set that at 97.5%. We also saw that growth didn't come back right away. It continued low in the first year and came back by less than 1% in the second year. Sales tax also didn't grow in future years. So if we look at the, instead of growth, as the Forecast Council was predicting, instead of that, we have a second year of downturn instead of picking back up, which is what economists say is most likely going to happen. So let's set that at 3% for lack of any other number. And let's say in 2022, maybe it starts to come back a little, maybe we'll see 2% growth that year. Then you've got all your other revenue sources. It is extremely unlikely that those will not be impacted. So what I'm hearing people using for an estimate, an overall estimate of revenue loss is 10%. And then that'll become a new base for all future years. If we do just those few simple things, less property tax collection, losses in sales tax of 12%, which could be quite modest, and a reduction in all of our other revenues, anticipated revenues of 10%, and we don't change our expenditures at all, then while we're gonna have an okay fund balance in 2020, we'll have lost about 7.6 million in revenue. And that creates a new base for future. And you see the fund balance in 2020 an estimated 14.1 million. But in 2021, it's closer to 6.6 million. And in 2022, we're in the red. That's if we make no changes in spending at all. Let's say that it's worse than this. Because across the nation, we're hearing the economists tell us that if it's only as bad as the recession, we're gonna be lucky. We're hearing that it's going to be worse. So let's say that we lose 20% of our sales tax. And that property taxes come in at 95%. Again, we'll get through this year, but it's 2021 and 2022 that have the greatest impact. This is where I'm having a lot of worries. I'm gonna say I'm worried, but this is the thing that's the most frustrating about the situation that we're in. We don't know what these numbers are gonna do. We've heard some jurisdictions assuming that they're gonna lose half of their sales tax. That would put us in a pretty bad place this year. I think that's pretty extreme, but let's say it's only 25% of our sales tax that we lose, which could be realistic. That gets us right down to the 10 million mark this year. So what we have to start talking about is how do we make up for the revenue loss? And I'm gonna set this back to where we're only losing like 12% this year. And that our property tax collections come in at 97%. That's still almost an $8 million gap with fund balance issues in the next 2 years that we need to be able to address. So we're gonna have to start talking about how do we reduce expenditures to make this up? And exactly how much do we have to reduce expenditures? That's the million-dollar question, because that is all tied to how much is the economy gonna tank and for how long. So what we have to do is plan for the worst and hope for the best. We should be talking now about how are we going to save somewhere between $5 to $10 million this year. That's about 5 to 10% of our general fund appropriation. And that's the conversation that I am encouraging commissioners to have. You've got an elected officials meeting coming up. I think it's next Wednesday, is that it, Romero?
Yeah.
So it's coming up next Wednesday. And I am encouraging you and the other elected officials to go over the options. I sent out the list that Denise and Olivia and I brainstormed. I've sent out the GFOA, cash is king, suggestions that they have brought to us. And I'm strongly recommending that long before we know what the real impact is, that we need to start making decisions. You've got to make the hard decisions about how we're gonna reduce spending to cover the revenue losses in the future. That's gonna be tough, but I think we need to start making those choices. Just a few things that we've already started to do. You commissioners have put a pause on construction of the jail expansion project. No one, I will say that no one doubts the need for beds at the jail. We know that we need more of the single cells, but now is not the time to launch into a big construction project. That's not going to save any money in the general fund, but we've got to figure out where we're at before we take big steps like that. The other thing that we put on pause, and I just let the team know yesterday, that we are going to put a pause on the purchase of our new ERP system. And that's our finance and payroll system. You had given us authorization to negotiate the contract for the ERP. The contract negotiation team was very close to having that contract completed and ready to bring to you for final approval. But we're putting that on pause until we see the size of this hole, because we know that that will have savings to the general fund. And what I've talked to the team about is we're not abandoning the ERP project, because we know that we eventually need to replace Munis and Eden, and we can gain so many efficiencies by doing so, but we have to put it on pause for now. Because I'm going to suggest to you, and I think you've heard Romero also talk about this, that our priority needs to be on preserving the teams of the county, because it's the teams and the work that our teams do that deliver the services to the citizens of the county. And we have to preserve that as much as possible. So we're gonna put a pause on the ERP. It's my understanding that there's also been a pause on the design of our new website. We're looking for other ways we can save cash now to get us through this time until we start to see the impact. But just those few things aren't going to be enough, and we need to talk about and implement what our saving strategy is going to be to get us through the next 2 to 3 years. So that's my presentation this morning, and I'd like to open it up.
I'm sure we have, I've got quite a few questions. I'm sure my seatmates do, but before we get to the questions, I want to ask either Denise Doty, Darren Bennett, or Olivia Outman if you have anything to add. So just speak up and unmute yourself and talk.
Hi, this is Denise Doty with the budget office. I've been
Robin put that together nicely. I've been monitoring a number of webinars looking at from economists' point of views and looking at the impact on state and local governments, and the impact is certainly expected to be significant, unfortunately.
Okay.
Sorry.
Darren or Olivia, anything?
Yeah, I know Robin, Denise, and Olivia have been watching these webinars, and they've been monitoring the situation. I've been really hard at work getting our CAFR done and preparing for the state audit, so they would be a little bit more experts at this point in these numbers and the potential impact. So first, I'm kind of seeing of a lot of this. This scares the heck out of me. We need more sales tax revenue, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I think part of it is we also need to make sure that we have a good fund balance. Fund balance doesn't correlate directly to cash, so keeping in mind that we do have fund balance and we can spend it down, but that doesn't always mean we're okay from a cash flow standpoint, which I know everybody's watching.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Robin, going back to what you said about the I don't know. I'm getting those questions also from a whole slew of folks. And I don't say I don't know. I just say I can't say. That way they don't know if I don't know it or if they think or it's a secret.
Well, now the public knows your strategy.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Okay.
Oh, no.
I've
That's
got,
what I'm usually saying is, oh, no. Every
no.
time we see something come through.
Well, I've got several questions. I'm going to ask two, and then I'll step back and let my seatmates in. I want to ask about the sales tax growth or lack of. And you say, let's just take, for example, 2016 to 2017, and it was 7.3, and then it grew to 10%. Is that 10%? Does that mean it was a 2.7 increase? It wasn't a 10% increase over the previous year. What's the base?
It was a 10%. Yes, it was a 10% increase over the previous year. I mean, if you look up here at these numbers right here,
Yeah.
you'll see that in 2016 we collected 14.2 million, and in 2017 we collected 15.6 million. Now I'd have to go back and see, what was going on at that time. And then we popped way up in 2018. This could be the bubble that Commissioner Edwards is continually talking about. Sadly, the bubble's about to burst. Yes, that is 10% growth over the prior year.
10% growth, so it was a 17.3% revenue rate. Am I not getting that right? If it was 7.3 and then it went to 10, now we're at 17.3%.
That's year over year, so it would have been roughly 17% growth compared to 2015.
To 2050, okay, got it. Okay.
This is the year over year growth rate.
Okay, thank you, year over year. And my final question, then I'll open it up, and that is the assumptions. Assumptions is in bold, and everything is a subset of that, and one is new construction. And it's blank all the way through.
Yeah, I haven't figured out how to factor in new construction yet. This model is only a few hours old. The numbers I was running into the wee hours of the morning weren't making sense, but when I woke up this morning, I thought, well, if I lay it out like this, I can see where I'm running into problems. So there are a few other things that I need to factor in. New construction has been growing. We'd hit a high, just a little history, we'd hit a high in, I think, 2008 of $1 billion in new construction. By 2010, that had dropped to 330 million. It's has slowly been growing over time, and I think last year new construction was something over 700 million. It's never gotten back to the $1 billion point, but we think we're gonna see it take again. And this is another thing that's important to think about in an economic downturn. We see the restaurant industry in crisis, right? And you think, okay, we've got a problem with restaurants, but what else does that really impact? Well,
Yep.
in any economic downturn, one key industry starts to go and the others start to go after it. It's a spiral. So we see oil prices, it's a negative now, oil per barrel, I've never seen that. What does that have to do with restaurants? Nothing, but that industry's starting to suffer. And on one of the webinars that I listened in on recently, it was the NACO call, they said that they're already starting to see mortgage defaults. And so the mortgage industry is going to start to go. We're going to see that go into default. We're going to have the impacts of the people who have been laid off and who are now unemployed, won't have money to spend, and that's going to affect all of the economy. They're already seeing a drop in people taking their homes off the market, so the housing industry is going to drop. We don't know what all is going to be impacted, and it's not going to bounce back right away. So
All right.
it's going to have this ripple effect.
All right, now I'll open it up to my seatmates. Unless, were you talking, Ramiro?
I had another quick question. Are we,
yeah.
any grants that we're going out for, does that factor into any of this at all?
So far, the way the grants factor in is they are all coming with non-supplant clause. So if you had something that was assumed in your budget prior to March 1st, you cannot use the money for any of those items. And it has been very plainly stated that we cannot use it for revenue loss. So in the particular scenario that's on your screen right now, we lose 7.8 million. We can't use the new grants to make up any of that. So let's say, we're getting a new grant, brand new grant, the HAVA grant that's coming from the CARES Act. That's for Help America Vote Act, HAVA. So that can only be used to improve our voting security when it comes to protecting people from COVID-19. So we'll add 349,000 in grant revenue, and we'll add 349,000 in expenditures, because you can only spend it on that, and you must spend it or give it back. So it does not improve this bottom line, and every one of the grants that we've seen so far does that. If we had been successful, and I'll talk a moment about the work that NACO's doing, NACO being the National Association of Counties. NACO and commissioners, thank you so much. I know that you spent part of Monday making phone calls to our congressional delegation. That's so important, because had we been successful, the bill that Congress is passing even as we speak, which is called COVID 3.5. It currently, the way it's being passed today, does not include money for counties. Had we been successful, we would have received $25 million that would have been specifically for revenue loss. That would have covered this money down here that we're losing. We could have spent it. It basically was meant to be supplanting money. It was meant to supplant what we're losing in revenue and cover all of our costs. We would be in so much better shape, and we still need that money. And apparently the president has made a commitment to work on a bill in Congress to get money for counties. And NACO is asking us to continue to ask our congressional delegation, our senators and our congressmen and women, to provide relief to counties. Because the money that comes into the counties, if you think about our $300 million budget, this is just the general fund that we're looking at. Many of our funds are going to be in this situation. We're just looking at the general fund right now. So, our entire budget of about $300 million, about 120 of that goes to employee costs, personnel, salaries and benefits. Those employees take that money and spend it in our community. Of the remaining 180,000 or million, 180 million, about 150 million of that goes to our local economy in the form of payments to nonprofits, vendors, suppliers. It boosts the local economy. So $1 to the county is $1 to the community. And we have to help our congressmen and our senators understand that and how important it is to fill this revenue gap. So that's a very long answer to what are those federal grants gonna do for us. So far, they support the types of response that we need to have to the pandemic, but they don't help us in the crisis that we're gonna face in providing our day-to-day services.
Okay, we have just about 30 minutes left, 35. I want to get to the commissioners. Commissioner Menser, any questions or comments?
That last point Robin made about the potential federal relief, I sat in on a NACO call and everything she said is accurate. They were saying that we were fighting against some false narratives. So when we talked to our federal delegation, the narratives that are out there kind of arguing against us are that county governments have mismanaged its finances, didn't have adequate reserves, and that's not true in most cases. That giving us money would take incentives away for us to reopen our economy versus, and that's not true. Every local leader is under immense pressure to try to reopen at the time that's safe. That the last CARES Act covered us adequately, which is absolutely not true, especially for counties under 500,000 people. And if they're arguing that there should be more guardrails, it shouldn't be as flexible as we'd like it to be. Well, then put the guardrails on. We'll work with you to create appropriate guardrails. That's not an excuse not to help us at all. And then the last point was the point that Robin made about how an investment in our counties, governments, are investment in our local economies for all the reasons that she outlined. The question I had on this, and I've got the budget containment options list that you previously passed out. You mentioned the Cash is King article, and I did see that floating around, although I'm not sure I have it in my hand. So if there's a way to get that to me, I'd like to see it. Something that was suggested is, tell me if this makes sense, or if it's possible, that since we've kind of had this historical dip in the Great Recession where pretty significant budget cuts were done, and staffing levels, there were layoffs and staffing levels were reduced. And then we had this period of whatever it's been, about 10 years where we've kind of recovered and we're getting to a healthy position. If we looked at certain offices and departments, some of those departments were kind of re-upped to where they were before, and other ones kind of did not recover the same staffing levels. I'm assuming that's true, and I would like to know if there's a way for us, if we're going to have to make hard decisions again of that nature, is there a way for us to look at a snapshot over time, like the budget and staffing levels of the different departments prior to 2007, and then which ones were restored and which ones were not? Because when we look at kind of a larger time frame, there may be a better way to make cuts than just being across the board, when if it wasn't done across the board equal, in the first instance, that suggests maybe we can't do it that way in the second instance. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yes, and I do have that information. It will be easy to update it. I update that every year, going back, I think to 2008 or 9. But yeah, I can easily have that for you.
Thanks. That's all I had.
Gary then, Gary Edwards?
Yes, I guess my concern is that we're going into a new reality that we've never been exposed to in the past. We've had recessions or, ups and downs, but we've never had the complete unknown that we're facing today. And because of that, I feel that we need to include outside entities in the discussions that we're about to enter into. And I mean groups like the Economic Development Council, the Chamber of Commerce, those type of individuals. And then we also need to be aware that a large percentage of our property taxpayers in Thurston County work for the state of Washington. And so I think it is a big portion of the decisions we're going to make. For an example, if the state was to lay off 10,000 people, and I know they're really considering some of their options, how much of an impact is that going to have on us? And then we need to figure out ways that we can encourage business to be successful. And, right off the bat, one of the things that I feel is beneficial is looking at a reduction in the regulatory roadblocks that are in place that slow down our economic engine. And I think at the same time, we have to be conscious about things like the environment. We don't want to just throw the baby out with the wash type of a thing. But we just need to be taking a new approach than what's ever been done before and a new analysis of what the problem is going to be. And I say going to be because we don't know what the state's really got in mind yet. We hear little rumors here and there that there's going to be these big layoffs. But big layoffs mean a lot more to us than they do to, say, Spokane County or Walla Walla or whatever. Because we have such a large base of state employees that live right here in our community. So I think as we start moving forward, we need to have that input from those other groups. I know we're the elected officials and we're supposedly representing those along with the community, but the reality is we've never been in this position before. Now, as we move forward, I think we need to have some of those folks at the table during some of our discussions. So I'm not saying they get to make a choice, but they can certainly influence that choice. So I think we need to look at things. I'm including, even right now, looking at this shutdown. Can we have a limited process of opening? I know the governor's talking about a dial rather than flipping a switch. I'm not saying that doesn't make sense, but we need to think about hurrying that process along and gauging that against being safe. So we got a lot on our plate. I'm looking forward to that. I do think some of these tough decisions we've already made when we selected who it was in the workforce that was necessary. So we have necessary and we have nice. We have nice to do, things we would like to do, and then we have to do this. We must do this to keep our community functioning properly. So those are all equations that I plan on figuring are a puzzle, trying to fit them all together. That's my goal.
Wow, I would add that Commissioner Edwards, you had some very salient points. And I agree, anybody can pilot a ship in a calm sea, and these are unprecedented events that we're in now with potential long-term ramifications, negative consequences. And so even our basic, for everybody, our basic ideological lines are going to blur. I think are going to have to blur a bit to survive. When I mean survive, what I mean is people. I'm real concerned about furthering the loss of jobs at the county level. So anything we can do to encourage work with the EDC and the economic development folks to get people back to work, to get businesses open, to get construction going, is going to help everybody down the line. So I'm in line with that, thinking that people have to come first. And I think all of our stances that we've taken ideologically, politically, whatever, are going to have to potentially bend here and there to make this whole thing work. But we're in this together, and I don't mean that as a typical mantra, but we're going to have to pilot the ship all the way through this economic time. This year is going to be a huge opening to leading the way into next year and the year after. The things that we do in the next 6 months. So I'm with you in that regard. Romero, do you have anything to add before I go back to the commissioners?
Yeah, I'd like to probably address the coordination with ADC and the chambers. And that coordination has already started. And as you may know, at the region level, we form the Thurston Strong. This group is including the EDC, the chambers, as well as the Visitors and Conventions Bureau, and all the representatives from the economic development point of view from the different jurisdictions. Jenica has been participating in those discussions. And in fact, I briefly mentioned to you yesterday about a request that might be coming from this group. And that request may be coming this Friday, and I will bring this for your consideration next Tuesday morning. But at the end of the day, also, they're looking for local governments to help them, the EDC as well as the chamber, to help how they can provide services to the small businesses. And I have potential options for you as to how you can probably exercise that support. And as Commissioner Edwards stated, this is totally unprecedented. Really, it is difficult to put our hands around as to how we can probably mitigate the impacts of this tremendous emergency, because everybody is suffering financially from the organizations they create, the business they create, jobs, from the organizations that provide support to those businesses to be successful, and up to the government who provides whatever stability we can provide to our society. So the financial impact goes across the board. And I believe that in order to mitigate the impacts, the board is going to have to make difficult decisions and perhaps start investing on the finite finances that we could have to start the economic engine back again, if that is the right approach. So long explanation as to the coordination with EDC and the chambers. That has already started. They already have a somewhat of a high-level plan. I will bring that to you again on Tuesday morning.
Thank you. That is, we've been asking people, and we're continually asking people to be flexible. They haven't lived this either. Be flexible, be understanding, be patient. And that's what I'm asking my seatmates, is to be flexible as we work through this. We've not done this before. And there's not a class you can take and get a degree in it. And as we're asking people to be flexible, we need to be as leaders too. And Gary and Ty, we're going to be leading this with the decisions that we make and set the stage for many for quite some time. Ty, do you have any other comments? Okay. Gary, anything further?
Well, I guess if we're getting ready to close out, I'd just like to just mention, I mean, we are in the middle of a serious storm, but the sky is not falling. And we don't want to be in the middle of a martial law type situation. And I think that's where it takes the private sector is gonna have a lot to do with, those folks are very smart. They know about social distancing. They know how to keep themselves safe. This whole stay-at-home business, I believe, has educated the public to the seriousness of what we're faced. And I think the public has the wherewithal to continue that type of activity as we start turning the dial, as the governor said. So sooner than later, and the longer we wait, the deeper this situation is going to get. So I think we've got our hands full, but it's doable. We can make it all work.
All right, Robin, when do we come back and talk as a group again regarding budget, and then go ahead and wrap it up, please?
So I do have one other thing to share with you, because there was an idea that was brought forward that I'd like to address. And that is that we could take, it was well over $3 million that's currently in our ER&R fund. That's the equipment rental and replacement fund. We collect money in that fund every year toward the replacement of our vehicles and large equipment, and some of our sheriff's equipment, like radios. So we pay into that fund every year, and every year we replace those things that need replaced. And a suggestion has been made that we would delay the replacement and could take the money that we would have spent this year from that fund and use it to fill the gap, if you will, to replace some of this lost revenue. So there are a few things about that that are not quite accurate, and reasons why you cannot take that money. The first is the money was paid in over time from not only the general fund, but from restricted funds. So even if you could take the money back, it would not all go to the general fund. The second is that part of the suggestion was that you make your cars last an extra year. What the suggester was not aware of is that we already examine every piece of equipment. We keep a life cycle log on every single thing, every car, every tractor, every radio is on a life cycle. And when it's coming to the end of the life cycle, your fleet manager sits down with the person that owns that equipment, that piece of equipment, and says, okay, here's its history. You're only driving it X many miles. We already assess whether or not those vehicles really need to be replaced this year. We only come to you for those items that are truly at the end of life cycle, or where the M&O cost would exceed the cost of replacement. So we already do that type of analysis. The next thing is, if you take that money out of the fund, then it's not there next year when you need to replace whatever that equipment is. You've decimated the fund. The other reason that the board cannot take the money out of that fund, and this is perhaps the most compelling reason, is there's an RCW, and I'll get you a copy of it, that specifically says that the legislative body of a county can put money into a reserve for a specific purpose. The only way to take money out of the reserve is to spend it for the purpose that it was put into the reserve to cover. And if you're going to take more than, I think it's $50,000 out of the reserve, you've not finished the purpose, if you will, of the reserve, then it has to go to a vote of the people on a general election ballot. So you're bound, you cannot take that money out of ER&R. and I'll get you a copy of the RCW. That's why that over $3 million is not available to you. What you can do is not contribute money to the reserve fund or only pay in a fraction of what it would cost in the coming year. And I'll have to get you how much that would be this year specifically from the general fund. But that's mostly for sheriff vehicles. And as I've told you before, there's a downside to every method of reducing the budget. And the downside to not paying into the reserve funds is the money won't be there when you need it. And the bulk of the general fund money paid into the ER&R fund is to cover the cost of sheriff vehicles. And we can talk about how that was done once before and what the impact was. But you need to think about all of the impacts of every choice that you make, and that's going to make it very hard. So that's the response to the idea that we could just take money from ER&R to cover this.
It'd be nice to have the sheriff's input on that as well, the ER&R. I'm sure he has a take on that. And it would be nice to have to live a life without consequence, but that's just not going to be the case here.
Right. I would close by saying that these are going to be extremely difficult choices, especially given the fact that we don't have facts. We don't have, not only do we not have all the facts, we have few if any facts right now. And everybody is going to have their own set of assumptions. It's going to be hard to come to a consensus about what the assumptions are going to be. And it's going to be difficult to make the choices about where you're going to reduce the budget. If there's anything that this team can do to support you, that's what we're here to do. And I'll find the next time. I don't think that we've got the next budget meeting on the calendar yet, but I'll make sure we get one.
Okay.
If possible, like next Thursday or Friday, because once you have the meeting next Wednesday with the elected officials, I am recommending that you follow that within a week, have a plan for how we're gonna make these budget revisions.
Okay, Commissioner Menser, go ahead, sir.
Robin basically just answered my question. I wanted to know what the timeline that she's suggesting for this type of planning, given that we don't have any facts, but she's saying we need to make decisions pretty quickly. And this is obviously a different timeline than the timeline in our binders about the overall budget process.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Any final thoughts, Gary?
No, but I just want to remind everybody that we are stepping into a new reality. And we may be in a situation that we're not going to want to follow all the rules that were put in place under our old reality. And so we might have to make some adjustments, and it might make people squirm, but if a new reality is such that we need to do that, I think we're going to have to be open to rethinking what is a have to do versus what's a nice to do.
Thank you. Romero, why don't you put a bow on this thing?
The additional comment that I'd like to provide to the board is following up to Robin's statement related to NACO and the potential new federal package that may help local jurisdictions, including the counties. I will encourage the board, the commissioners, to continue to have those conversations, phone calls, emails to the federal delegation. Please don't wait until something materializes. And I believe your continuing phone calls and continuing plead for help to the federal delegation, and that we have a coordinated effort across the nation, may lead us to an additional federal package that may see local jurisdictions, including the counties, as a lifeline. Because this is really a lifeline. It is not, as Robin has stated, this is not about keeping county employees and the payroll. It's about the economy behind that, really what we need to start looking. Because it's unprecedented, and it's not about saving jobs. It's about to continue to invest in the communities that we have, and county employment is part of that. And also county investment on businesses and construction outfits and everything that we do in terms of providing services. That is what we need to concentrate. So please don't take your foot off the gas in contacting the federal delegation, because that is so important, and please continue to do so. I will have organized a meeting with your elected officials here in the county is for next Wednesday at noon. I will encourage Robin to go through this model again, just to paint the picture as to how difficult the decisions ahead of us are going to be. And at that point, I think is just framing the conversation to the elected officials. And at that point, you will be in the position to start assessing what steps you may need to take to address this gap. Because the gap is this year, 2020.
All right. Well, that concludes the meeting then. Thank you all. Thank you to all the finance and budget team for all that you do for us. I appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. Goodbye.